Hi, and welcome to North and Chick, a podcast about food, community, and well-being.
I'm Hayley North. I work as a holistic chef, food educator, yoga and movement teacher.
And I'm Kirsten Chick, nutritional therapist, writer, and author.
Together, we're passionate about nourishing our community with food, nutrition, movement, and in many other ways.
In our work and personal lives, we meet so many inspiring people doing incredible work for their community. So we have a wonderful lineup of guests for you. We'll be sharing our conversations alongside recipes, nutrition tips, and general life tips.
We'd love your feedback, so please get in touch via our social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter as North and Chick. You can follow us there and also subscribe to our podcast to get an alert each time we release a new episode.
Hi, Hayley. How are you this month?
Hi, Kirsten. I'm really well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well too, and I'm really excited about today's guest, Anna Strickland from Heard in London. We're going to hear from her later, particularly about her self-empowerment photography. So that's really got me thinking about self-esteem and body image and all of those things that self-empowerment photography just brings up for me, really. So in terms of self-esteem, as a nutritional therapist, that's something I see in my these days virtual consultation room all of the time. There are so many reasons why people might have self-esteem issues. Whatever the reason, the result is often a pressure to deprive yourself of basic nourishment. It might be I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy of taking up that much time or space or attention that's needed to feed myself really good, nutritious food. Or it might be I'm too busy doing something else, which is really often the same thing, actually. So one thing I look for when I'm going through somebody's case history and I'm asking about their eating habits, one thing that often shows up through their eating habits is how well or how poorly they're prioritizing their own nourishment. And some of the patterns I might see are that they work first, for example. So maybe they're eating breakfast on the train or skipping breakfast completely because they don't have time before work starts. Maybe they're eating lunch at their desk or skipping lunch or just grabbing a bag of crisps or a chocolate bar. Or maybe they're using coffee or sugar or just pure adrenaline to get through the day instead of proper breaks and proper nutrients. And maybe eating dinner really late because you finish late, so you can't actually have that meal till late, and it's not really a good time for your digestion. It may be that they're putting their family first, so that's all really understandable, putting your family first, and especially if you've got children. A lot of people will be cooking for their family's tastes and needs rather than their own. Maybe their kids won't eat brown rice, or their partner won't eat brown rice or doesn't like vegetables. Maybe one of them is vegetarian and one of them feels like they need a little bit more animal protein in their diet, and it just doesn't happen for one of them because they're eating together. A lot of the time I hear people are eating much later than they really want to, not because they're getting home late from work, but because their partner is, or they're skipping breakfast because they're too busy sorting the kids out. So as I said, all understandable. But with some of these, there are easy, flexible compromises to be had. So maybe if it's that your family or your partner won't eat vegetables, we'll still cook them for you, just don't cook them for them. Maybe if you're running around sorting out somebody else in the morning, have a handful of nuts so you're not just running on empty, or a couple of seeded oat cakes, something like that. So really have a think about how you can simply, quickly prioritize yourself. And maybe it's about making a little bit more space, providing those gaps in the day, rearranging things. That often shows up patterns, not just around how busy people are, but actually, are you really prioritizing your nourishment? So there are often issues of self-esteem with people that I see really not prioritizing themselves, but there are also other complex issues going on around weight and body image. I've never really had a lot of standard weight loss clients, more people who either need to lose weight or gain weight for health reasons, but it's often there as an aside or an undercurrent that they're not happy with their weight, they're not happy with how their body looks. And my primary approach for most people there, and the most successful one I found, is actually to shift their relationship to food. I'm going to have some tips for this later at the end of the podcast, but shifting our relationship to food also often helps shift our relationship to ourselves. So that kind of food psychology aspect of my work I find incredibly important. And then if weight really is an issue, actually there are often other things underpinning that we need to figure out. So for example, there's increasing evidence that inflammation is a precursor to weight gain, and then being overweight contributes to more inflammation, and then you've got a vicious cycle heading towards obesity. Yo-yo diets just help that by messing with the blood sugar and insulin pathway, so there's more inflammation. So you get obesity being the result of things like type 2 diabetes rather than the cause. And helping people to understand that also really helps take the judgment out of the picture. It's that self-judgment that often gets in the way. And if we realise that actually there's biochemistry there that we need to shift, and it's not about willpower, it's not about being rubbish and failing, then that reframes the whole picture. And I'm guessing, Hayley, that you deal with this a lot with your work as well.
Gosh, yeah, absolutely. This definitely comes into our relationships with our moving bodies, and this underlying thing of self-judgment, self-esteem, self-worth. It really is the underlying recurring theme, regardless of the situation and the circumstances that have brought someone to that place. Generally, they are the key threads that I find are beneath whatever's going on. And movement is a brilliant way to work with this. So for me, first of all, it's absolutely essential that nobody feels excluded from the classes, and we'll work really hard to ensure that it's an inclusive, accessible space for everybody, regardless of the level of ability, of the size, of the shape, of the gender. There's always a space for everybody, and that movement is therapeutic, movement heals, movement is connecting, that movement is essential, movement is empowering, it's liberating. But there can often be a real disconnect between head, mind, brain, rationality, cognitive, intellect, and the body, the somatic, the felt, kinesthetic. And what I really love is to work in ways with movement, is to start to make that connection again, to start looking for wholeness and integration in the body and in the moving body. And then in terms of how emotions affect the body and psychology, our life circumstances, trauma, our upbringing, society pressures, everything impacts the body. And the more and more and more I work with people, you see how it manifests into the body. It feels so important to move emotion and to move feelings and to move our experiences, our lived experiences through the body. That's an energy, and that it has to move. As soon as it gets stuck in the body, problems, issues, dis-ease, things start to happen. So that's really, in whatever movement discipline I'm teaching, however I'm working with somebody in a one-to-one or a group, we always look at this movement of energy through the body, keeping things flowing.
Do you mind if I interject with a question for you, Hayley?
Not at all.
That's really interesting, and I totally agree with all of that. Have you found that, because I find this with my work as well, have you also found, Hayley, that when you're working with people who have had often quite major trauma, that they can't physically be in their bodies, so everything is a distraction to not be in their physical bodies, and it's the most difficult thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And in situations like that, often you're working on a one-to-one basis, and you're working very slowly over time. Situations like that, you need a whole bespoke approach where you're working totally at the pace and the level and the depth to which this person may be able to handle at any one moment in time. And I do quite a bit of work with that in one-to-one situations.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting how there's, that you can offer a bespoke approach for different people. You can offer one-to-ones for that reason. Now, our expectations of what our bodies should be able to do in a movement class, there's so much.
Oh, God, yeah. Then you've got now, the average yoga room. I know so many people who are put off from going to yoga because, it's not the practice of the yoga itself necessarily. It's the whole bit around it of oh my God, am I going to fit in here? What's everybody wearing? Who am I going to be sat next to in the room? Can I get to the back so the teacher can't see me? There's so much stuff that might stop someone from going to these things. That's even before the practice itself has even started. I think yoga is a big one because of the industry that's built up around it and the imagery and the marketing and the perfect pose photographs and all of the clothing and kind of perpetuation of this perfect image, the perfect pose, the perfect body. My main core teachers are in their 70s. And this exclusivity around the body has never been part of the yoga that I have thankfully found and studied in. But I know it's prevalent. It's huge in the yoga world. And, as teachers and practitioners, we have the power, we have a platform, we have an opportunity to change that and to make everyone feel welcome, because yoga is for everybody, as is Qigong. And Qigong is interesting because it doesn't seem as off-putting in that way as yoga does for some reason. So it attracts people who often feel excluded from the yoga world or don't feel it's open and available to them, which I find fascinating. So I'm delighted to introduce our guest for the podcast this month. Anna Strickland of Heard in London is an empowerment photographer and circus expert with a strong focus on social justice and how to find creative solutions to help people reclaim their bodies. She has spent 20 years running one of the UK's premier circus agencies, Missing Link Productions. For 6 years, she was the UK director of operations for Circus Kathmandu, a social circus which worked with survivors of human trafficking and other vulnerable situations. More recently, Anna has set up True You Today, which supports self-defined survivors. Anna's credits include the 2012 Olympics opening ceremony, choreography for Universal Pictures, and working on a cabaret slot with Liza Minnelli. She's also done a TED Talk on peace and protest. Her photography work has been printed in The Guardian, the BBC, Huffington Post, and The Times, amongst others. In 2020, she won an honourable mention for the Margaret Cameron Street Photography Award. Anna believes that the core tenet of Buddhism, the reverence of life, is what threads all these paths together and keeps her striving for creative new ways to make sure no one gets left behind. Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast this month.
Thank you for inviting me.
That's quite a resume you've got there. You've done so much, and I know you still do so much. But currently you're really focusing on your empowerment photography. So let's start there. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah. During lockdown, I started to do a Doorstop Photography project, which I think quite a few people were doing during the time to try and help people feel a bit more connected to their communities. And I decided that I was going to try and take photographs of people in these little snippets of their life as I was cycling around delivering groceries to people in my local area. I started to have quite a lot of conversations with people who were really struggling, and people were telling me about old issues that they thought that they had resolved years ago, which seemed to be coming up for them. And people seem to really enjoy having the opportunity to have a different face in front of them and to be able to talk about what was going on for them. Lots of the stuff that was coming up for people was old patterns of disordered eating. And there was an awful lot of people who had found that old ways that they had viewed themselves had reared their heads quite strongly during lockdown. And I decided to try and combine some of those skills that I had picked up in various other avenues of my life and really focus on helping people see themselves in a fresh light and really convince them, hopefully, along the journey that all bodies are worthy and all bodies are welcome. And in this sort of new horizon that we're walking towards, that if we could try and create a space where more people felt comfortable in the skin that they're in, then I think that we have a lot more chance of building a world that is more welcoming and more happy for both us and the people who come after us. So I was really trying to seize a lot of the stuff that had come previously and run with this particular angle. So I've been taking photo shoots of people who've been really struggling and people who would not necessarily normally be allowed to be seen to be beautiful in many ways. So I've been doing baby loss photo shoots, I've been doing chemo shoots, I just did a mastectomy shoot last week. I've been doing divorce photography, which I thoroughly love, and people who are just, quite frankly, uncomfortable with their bodies. It's quite often their tummies, and just trying to be able to give them tangible evidence that they are beautiful just as they are. And I think when they are seen by someone who really respects them, and that photograph is taken in that moment, that can be quite helpful in undermining some of the things that they might be telling themselves when they look in the mirror. So that's my latest little project that I'm working on.
Brilliant. And there's so much to unpick there, really, isn't there, or to kind of ask more about. The last thing that you touched on around body image, and especially women's tummies, I mean, I can really identify with that. I've been able to identify with that statement since I was about 5, I think. Where do you think it all comes from, this unhappiness with our tummies?
Shock reveal, the patriarchy. I think that we've got like, it's very rare in life that we have one very easily identifiable perpetrator. But it's interesting that you say that you can identify with it and name the age. What I think we find is not really talked about very much is that I think that nearly every woman can identify with it, and we quite often think or assume that straight-sized people aren't self-conscious about their tummies, when actually it is women there is no size that you are allowed to feel okay in. There's no shape that is like the bingo tick mark. You're allowed to feel okay about yourself now. And a huge amount of that is because a lot of the photographs that we see and are fed and have been fed our whole lives, the women in those photographs don't look like that either. And I think that the more we see of bodies that look human as opposed to digitally altered, the more our brains are trained to find it beautiful and attractive what we're surrounded by. So the more that we can flood our views with people with perfectly human bodies, the more that we can look in the mirror and realise that maybe we have a perfectly human body as well.
Lovely, really nice. And how much of that do you think is directly related to our physical body and how we perceive our physical bodies to be? And how much do you think is related to other kinds of self-esteem issues that then are being reflected into that whole self-perception issue?
I think it's really interesting that our mental health, and I mean, even the phrase "it's all in your head" is very much disassociated from the rest of your body, as if your head isn't part of your body, as if your mental health isn't part of your body. And I think that it is part of the power dynamic that if we disassociate ourselves into small little segments, then we can blame. If we just sorted out that one bit, the rest of it would be okay. And I think that we are very much taught that if we carry on thinking horrible thoughts to ourselves and yet manage to physically change our shape and size, when we get to that gold star size or shape that we've been aiming at, that our thoughts will automatically change. And of course that isn't true. And even if people don't believe that my phrasing of saying of course it isn't true, I'm sure that nearly everybody has photographs of themselves where they were a different size or shape, or maybe a size that they would only dream of now and probably weren't happy then. And that's where you can kind of pick out the evidence to really know that it isn't about your body, it's about your thoughts and about the kindness with which you treat your body. and from your compassion towards yourself, that's when you can really develop a sense of love for both yourself and people around you. I think for me, very specifically on my journey as a fat woman in 2021, trying to sort of address how I hold myself in the world, one of the key things that was a real turning point for me was, rather than working really hard on trying to Instagram love myself, in quotation marks, I decided to really work on the thought of, could I love myself if I was 3 times fatter? That felt like a really fundamental shift for me. And if I can't, what am I saying about women who are that size now? And it felt really, it's my politics of wanting to make sure that all women are welcome that really drove me to do my own self-care work, because it isn't fair on people who have the bodies that I'm disparaging in my thoughts to myself if I'm not making the effort to try and create love in this space.
That's really powerful work for pretty much anybody who's probably listening to this podcast. And you also work a lot with survivors.
Initially, I had been doing work with domestic violence shelters and sexual violence support services, offering them photography shoots for women who'd have their bodies weaponised. And the project that I run, which is True You, we have a project called Workshops for Survivors, and that was really trying to use the physical movement and all of the different parts of your physicality to help people reclaim their bodies and really feel their way back into themselves. So we have aerial work for core strength, stretching, and sort of feeling your own capacities in a way, and your own limitations, your own boundaries. We have group dance classes for anxiety, mental health, trying to help build connections in local community and know that you're surrounded by supportive people. And I do photo shoots directly for people, for them to be able to have sort of, like I say, tangible evidence to see themselves the way that someone who really loves and respects them sees them, which isn't necessarily how they speak to themselves or how they look at themselves. So that's the work that I do there.
So I know you're really good at this, Anna. What makes you so good at this? What are the qualities that you bring to photo shoots that make them so special?
I think that the way that I take photographs is the way that I see the world, and I'm full of silliness and playfulness and ridiculous snippets of something might look like something else, but that is interlaced with an ultimate love and respect and reverence for the person in front of me. So when I'm looking at someone and wholeheartedly respecting their life and the journey that they've been on and the person who's standing in front of me, obviously I'm then able to click a button on a machine that captures what I see. I spent quite a lot of time feeling like I wasn't really a photographer. I couldn't call myself a photographer because I'm not very good at the technical stuff. And I realised that actually the technical stuff can be learnt, but that magic to be able to really see people in all of their beauty and to make them know that all facets of them are welcome in that space, that's something really important and quite rare. I think our society is quite prone to looking out for the differences and criticising people and looking at the ways that people are different and not as great, whereas I'm quite prone to thinking everything's brilliant all the time. That's brilliant, you're brilliant, there we are, that's really amazing. And that's almost too enthusiastic in a way, and I think that is very much a resource that's depleted in people quite often, of looking at themselves and seeing their brilliance. And I see it quite often in 2,000 people a day.
So you've done a lot of different kinds of photography as well, though. So you've photographed riots in London and circus performers in Kathmandu and graffiti. And is there a particular theme to your work, do you think?
I think the theme to my work is the theme that drives me generally, which is social justice. In the riots, it felt very much like I didn't want the story to be told to be a right-wing red-top tabloid saying how dreadful it was. Like, I wanted the story of the people who were setting fire to things to be told, and I don't I am very conscious of what I didn't learn at school, is that the victors always get to write the history, and with a camera you get to get into the action. And I think because I don't look like a great big paparazzi boy with his huge long telefocal lenses, I can sometimes get into the action a little bit more, and people don't really notice me, and I can have more honest conversations with people. There's actually a little moment in my TED talk where I speak about a group of young men trying to rob me of my camera during the riots, and the conversations that I had with them to be able to prevent that happening. And that, you don't have to watch their talk. It's because I respected them. Quite simply, there's a whole load of people trying to attack me, and I showed them respect. So I wanted to know what they had to say and why this was going on, and I interacted with them as humans as opposed to attackers. And I think the work in Kathmandu, the work against human trafficking, was very much linked to my circus work over here, but the drive for social justice, not particularly well known, I don't think, but Nepal is one of the poorest countries in the world, and the people work and strive really hard there to create better lives for themselves, and they are unfortunately quite frequently knocked back. And it was a huge driver for me, the compassion and the care of the young people that I was working with. And over here, working in circus just feels like something really magical, and also a little bit of the underdog as well. It's the underdog of the arts industry. Like, we're never given the credit that theatre or ballet or opera, or in many ways it's not seen to be a legitimate art form, even though it's like human beings doing the most incredible things. I think it's seen as a bit of a sort of scruffy sibling, and that's probably what drew me there in the first place as well. I'm attracted to the scruffy siblings.
And you said earlier on that you didn't have the confidence to call yourself a photographer because you didn't have the technical skills, but you quite clearly have those now. So how have you developed those?
I think for quite a long time I found photography to be quite exclusive. I found out I was dyslexic quite late on in life. I think prior to that, definitely before that, I just thought that I was stupid. And so I spent quite a lot of effort trying to hide the fact that I was stupid, and I didn't want people to find out that I couldn't work all of this stuff out. And it's quite amazing resourcefulness of like how much goes on into trying to hide this lack of thing that you're feeling. There's a thing called the exposure triangle, which is your aperture and your ISO, and you've got all of these, like the f-stops and the 100s and the s's, and just all of this sort of bits of code that were jumbling up in my head. And I managed to summarize it into 3 easy points that I needed to remember. And I read those points every single day for 7 years maybe, and I still couldn't get it in my head. It just wouldn't sink in. And eventually, having spent an awful lot of time online over the last few years, I finally managed to find a teacher who was not condescending and was speaking about it in a really basic way, that the information was laid out in a way that my brain could understand. And from there, I found someone who was doing boudoir shoots that were very beautiful and very sexy, but quite male gazy to my eyes. But I quite liked the fact that it was a woman-owned studio. It was very empowering in the way that she was making the women feel. It just didn't quite sit right with where I wanted to be. And from there, I then found a body image activist who's also a photographer. He does the most incredible work. And she's just set up something called the Boudoir University, which is all about training photographers to be intersectional in their approach towards photography. And I am just at the moment writing a course for an elective course that I'm going to be teaching there on boundaries and how to keep safe boundaries and maintain safe boundaries within a photography session. But she teaches, and that she's got a whole load of different tutors on the course, and they teach intersectionality and anti-racism within ableism, ageism, sort of all different angles of how to make a photography space more welcoming. And so creating photographs where we have more bodies represented. It's really wonderful work. I'm really excited about moving forward with that.
Yeah, congratulations. That does sound amazing. What's the course called? Can people access it yet?
Well, the course is for photographers specifically, so I'm not too sure that it would be too relevant if you are not a photographer, but it is called 7 Pillars Programme. It's called the Boudoir University, and the teacher is Terry Hofford, and that's Terry with an I.
Brilliant. So what do you specifically love about being a photographer?
I love being able to give people evidence that they are worthy of love. And I think as soon as if you've got someone stood in front of you that shows you respect and sees you in a really beautiful way, I think having that evidence that undermines the stories that you're telling yourself is really, really important. And there's something that sort of freezes a moment in time, which is really, really magical. Intriguingly for me, not that interested in film particularly much, almost because that tells someone else's story. I think there's something about photography that you can really write your whole narrative upon. And that's why it's really important to do the work my side to make sure that the work is as accessible as possible, and to really make sure that people really see their own sparkly, shiny glory in the photographs that I give them. And also to kind of prepare them for the fact that they might not like the photographs. It would be naive of me to think that someone can be really mean to themselves for 47 years and I'm going to take a photograph of them and they're going to think that they look incredible and stunning. But I might give them something that can support them on a day where they feel like nothing could be possible. And then they can capture sight of that picture and go, actually, there is potential for, maybe this isn't the only story. Maybe the cruelty with which I've been speaking to myself isn't the only possibility here.
Wow, I love that. That's amazing. So many questions. And I know Hayley's got a lot of questions for you as well. Before I do hand you over to Hayley, one question we like to ask to all of our guests is whether you have a food memory that you'd like to share with us.
I miss Nepal for a lot of reasons. I miss friends and family there and all the people that I work with and the things that I see and smell walking down the streets and all of the memories that I have there. And given the pandemic that we're in, there's an element of fear that I will not get back there for quite some time. But at 4 a.m. in the morning, or occasionally in the middle of an afternoon, I also massively miss the street food. And there is 2 particular sorts of street food that would be eaten every day, and neither of them are Nepali, but I very much associate them with Nepal. And one of them is pani puri, which is an Indian dish, which is like a crispy rice ball, which is filled with chickpeas and potatoes and onions, and then some spicy water. And you're sort of given it on a plate. And it's a little dish of 3 of them. And you knock it back in one and you get all of, if you're not careful, you get all the juice down your chin and you crunch and it's just full of tamarind, joy flavours. There's a whole story going on in each little crispy, bubbly ball. And while you've knocked your head back to get it all in your mouth in one go, another one will appear on the dish. And as many as you eat will appear on the dish perpetually. And at some point when you're full, you have to both sort of get it in your mouth, but also tell the woman normally who's making them for you to stop and have to say that. Otherwise, and you pay according to how many you've eaten. So it's in their interest to keep replenishing your little silver plate. And it's a wonderful little game that they're very, very good at getting the next one in really quickly on your plate. And the other street food is momos, which is traditional Tibetan dumplings. And both of them just fill me with memories, lots of memories of the earthquake in Nepal and people I love and just survival and like really getting on with it. And it's very, very like all of the work in Nepal is just very rich and full of 1,000 different things, and all of them mashed together make this beautiful story that you can't quite tangibly explain. Does that make you hungry?
Yeah, I am salivating. I always salivate when I hear stories of delicious food. But yeah, it just evokes such an amazing image as well, almost like you've just taken a photograph for us. So thank you.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I just feel whisked off to Nepal, to all those wonderful smells and flavours. Wonderful. So whilst we're in Nepal, would you tell us a little bit more, Anna, about the anti-human trafficking work that you did there and how you got involved with that?
So I worked in circus in the UK since I was 14, was when I first started performing, I think. And when I was 18, I went to Nepal and helped work Tibetan refugee camp with my mum. And we spent a few days there helping some people sort of document and set up a dentist in Tibetan refugee camp. And my mum had a huge affinity with Nepal, and my mum really loved climbing, rock climbing, and Everest was a huge sort of life goal for her to go and visit. And when my mum died 10 years ago, after her death, I was really seeking things that connected me to her. And it was a sort of quite a turbulent time in my life for obvious and many unobvious reasons. And I had heard of this circus in Nepal that was a social circus. I knew that it had social justice core behind it, didn't really know much about it, and reached out to them to see if they needed any support. And I ended up going out there, and I think within about 6 months I was on their board of directors and became very sort of close with the incredible team there. And the team there are made up of young people who've been returnees from having been rescued from Indian circuses. Nepal's a very long, thin country, and it has very few border checks. It has quite a lot of opportunity for people to just slip into the country, and it's the border between Nepal and India is one of the busiest trafficking routes in the world. So the young people that I work with are all returnees from circuses who were quite proud of the skills that they'd learned over their time in India, and they wanted to start their own business and run their own company. So I was helping them establish a business and help them work out how to run a circus and how to get their work in. And it's been really incredible to see them bloom from very timid people who were really finding their feet in the world with a lot of decisions to be made, to people who are so confident and so incredible, both on stage and off stage, and really in control of their own lives and really capable of making their own decisions. And we've spent the last, pre-pandemic, we spent the last sort of 18 months or so touring a really incredible documentary which helps them tell their stories, and they are the narrators of the story. And throughout the film, throughout the process of making the film, we kept going back to them and saying, right, how do you want to tell this bit of your story? So they were really co-creators in the film itself, and that film can be watched online now, and that's called Even When I Fall, and it's a proper feature-length documentary, and it doesn't shy away from the difficulties of essentially of poverty, and how it's not as easy and black and white as we may think things are over here, when we look at the fact that, yes, obviously selling humans is bad, but what is the driving force behind that? And also, what's it like when you leave a situation where someone is completely in charge of all of your decisions and makes all of the choices for you, to have to leave enslavement and then work out how you're going to pay your rent or how you're going to put food on the table. There's an awfully complicated story that is not told in the way that we think about it over here, and that film tells that story quite beautifully. So that's very worth going and seeing if you can find the time.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna, for sharing that with us. And we'll pop that link on our social media platforms also, so people can find their way to that documentary. That's great. So how much did this inspire you to work with empowerment photography for survivors, particularly in reclaiming their bodies?
A lot of the work that I've done over the years has been little snippets of what I've built now, whether it's from circus things or with Circus Kathmandu. We work with forum theatre. For people who don't know what that is, I would probably scandalously classify it as somewhere cross between therapy and acting. And you create a scenario where you bring audience members out into role play to be able to get them to practice how they might respond, or how much they might choose to respond to a particular situation. And on a particular time that I had returned from Nepal, I think probably following the earthquake, people may or may not remember, there was an extremely big earthquake there in 2015, was at the same sort of time that the Me Too movement was breaking over here. And it seemed to me to be very obvious to pull some of the resources that I had to be able to look at how people could start reconnecting with their body following trauma. And what I really noticed about the Me Too movement was that there was a whole load of people who, rightly or wrongly, were encouraged to lay bare their stories, possibly on social media, and to let their friends and peers know very publicly of their own traumatic past. And then there was nothing. It was sort of like people were encouraged to take their skin off, and then that was it. That was the end of the story. And I was also very conscious of that not being repeated with the Reclaim These Streets movement that has just surged in the last sort of few months or so. And I was looking at my own personal history of things that I found that were very useful when I was processing gendered violence. And I definitely found that I could quite easily go through a physical and emotional flashback to abuse in a dance class at the gym. And if I could just stay focused on my physical movement, then I could still stay present. Whereas if I was on my own on a sofa, I could quite easily get re-lost in the memories. And there was something that felt really imperative about that, both the movement, but also being in a community, in a supportive space where everybody around you just sort of kind of laughing and having a nice time and still being silly, and being able to keep that anchor of presence of community around you feels really important. So branching out from there, of both including all of my work and knowledge of the circus work with trauma, with the anti-trafficking work, with my own personal story of dance and gendered violence and abuse, and my passion for photography, all of them felt like sort of quite an important triangle of slightly different angles of exactly the same thing. I think of it a little bit like one of those old milking stools. If you want to know, you need all three of those legs to be kind of covered: the community aspect, the physical, the mental health aspect of it, and the visual reminders, and someone else telling you from an outside point of view, or giving you a reflection from an outside point of view that maybe things might not be as vicious as you might be telling yourself. And so that kind of all three angles of that, I think, provided some kind of care and nourishment to support gendered violence survivors that I definitely felt was lacking. And I noticed that a lot with the support services that I work with. So I work with some incredible support services who refer their users to me, and people who go to them who need a bit of extra support. But quite a lot of the support services that I work with are so underfunded that they will have maybe 9 weeks or so of funding for some talking therapy counselling, and that's kind of it. The rest of a lifetime of how you work with the body and how you process things as they come up new was sort of is an area that is much neglected. And as lockdown was proving, these things can, even when you've done a whole load of work on them, when things are under pressure, they can quite often be the weak points that you go back to as a coping strategy when things are really tough. So I wanted to be able to provide support for people who weren't directly just having survived stuff. Actually, I wanted to be looking at people who walked around and told everyone they were fine when actually maybe they might not always be. That's my kind of target audience.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Anna. I'd like to return to something that you were just talking about, people who work in the arts and how this community has been severely affected by the pandemic. And I know that you've been working really hard to support this community. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've been doing that?
Yeah, so with True You, which is the COC that I run, we have, with all of these things put together, with the dance and the circus and the photography, that has come under the umbrella of True You. Pre-pandemic, I had been working on a project which had come out off the back of the Me Too movement, trying to look at the way that physicality and physical movement could support people who had experienced sexual violence. When the pandemic hit, the framework of what I feel was very specifically needed at that time expanded. And I saw and was immediately aware of quite how frightening the numbers and the impact of domestic violence would be upon people being trapped in their own homes and people not being able to leave. I have spent quite a number of years alongside Sisters Uncut working on trying to campaign to raise the importance of the messaging of domestic violence in the UK, and the ironically, with it's quite often being called an epidemic, that prior to this pandemic, 2 women a week are killed by their partners or former partners in the UK, and during the first months of lockdown, the murder rates doubled. And I was just very aware of people being locked in behind closed doors with people that they may not be able to escape. And whilst many people were complaining that they couldn't go to the pub, there would be an awful lot of people who were in situations which were incredibly unsafe. And as with the Me Too movement, what's next? I guess the immediate help and the immediate danger, there are specialist services for. But once that immediate danger has passed, then what? I'm very, very aware of the longer story and the longer impact for things. So I started looking at the need around me, and both the potential for how I could support people in the most need, and also the people who were struggling most in the pandemic. My friends quite often tend to be performing artists, obviously working in circus and lots of creative sorts. And circus's sole remit is to draw a crowd in many respects. I took a moment to pause and realised that the majority of the people around us had lost so much work that it was going to be quite a long time before people were able to rebuild their livelihoods, and also looking at these people in great need. So I got my thinking cap on, and then decided to go to all of the artists and people in my local area, find out people who had different skills, different skill sets, different abilities. So we got chefs, and we got people sewing and singing, and trapeze artists and dance teachers and boxing tutors, and lots of different people doing different physical movement creative things. And then I spent a lot of time trying to get funding for the project. We got some incredible funding from both Comic Relief and the Lottery and local councils, for various other groups. And I went to the local domestic violence shelters and homeless shelters and sexual violence support services, and they were able to offer all of this stuff to their service users for free. So it's myself doing photo shoots, we've got dance classes going on, we have aerial trapeze classes, and it's been quite a nice sort of rebuilding unity of local community to be able to find a whole load of people who have lost work due to the pandemic, be able to give their skills to people who really need it, who might not necessarily have been able to afford these things in the first place. So it's been such a winner. Loads of people have got loads of work out of it, and loads of people who are having a really hard time have got loads of nice free stuff. So in 2020 we did just over 200 workshops, and that is continuing into 2021, and I'm always seeking more funding.
You really are one of those people, Anna, who just does stuff, which I just love. You don't let things hold you back. Like, for instance, your photography, as we've discovered, you weren't kind of like classically trained or technically trained to start with. In fact, struggled with the technical side, but you had that other side. You saw the magic in people, which can't be taught, as you've already mentioned, and then learnt in your way the technical side. You went to circus school for 5 weeks all those years ago, turned that around, built a website, built an agency for circus performers that's still going on 20 years later. You're now like a leading empowerment photographer who've done all these projects around the world. And even when everything gets shut down in lockdown, you still find ways to carry on, to keep supporting people and to keep promoting social justice on every level in what you do, whatever project you get involved with.
Thanks. I want to flag in, like, I feel like my biggest thing at the moment, I want to add the PS of that of while I'm also struggling with long COVID. So that exactly personal challenges as well.
Very nice to hear. Look, for anyone who doesn't have any contact with anyone who has long COVID, it really genuinely feels like 5 days a week feel like the Monday after Glastonbury. I'm just so destroyed the whole time. So to keep all the balls in the air, it's the love and passion for humanity and the potential for change that is the biggest driver for me, and in a way that sort of underlines the exhaustion of the physical ailments.
Yeah, because you've got such a powerful driving force behind what you do. And I know that you practice Buddhism, and how does that support you in this?
I think it's a core underpinning foundation stone to everything that I do. I chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo every morning. I'm sure lots of people who practice this Buddhism too would probably do it in the evening, but to be honest, I'm quite tired by that point. There's something about the connection of the chanting that it slows things down and it quietens down the noise enough. It feels like I'm able to listen to the truth a bit better. Enables me to reconnect and make my own choices from a place of respect and reverence for the life of both myself and those around me, rather than instinctual habits or quite often self-defense. I feel that when I'm not chanting, or if I haven't chanted enough or kind of settled myself enough, a lot of my responses can be sort of quite instinctual. That isn't always conducive to progress or to peace. And I think that the chanting reminds me that actually it isn't about what happens to you, it's about how you respond to it. And so being able to remind myself on a daily basis that I have a choice as to how I want to respond to things gives me complete agency over my life and the way that I choose to interact with the life and community and those around me. I used to have a flatmate who was also Buddhist, and we would have wonderful evening sessions where one of us would get to the end of a long story about something that was really whingy and terrible, and the other one would nearly always respond with, yeah, so I guess you could be right, or you could create peace. And that always felt incredibly irritating to hear. But that's sort of what it comes down to, really. I think there's something about Buddhism which enables me to have the absolute privilege of being able to let go of the need to be right. Like, if I think that I'm right the whole time, then what have I got to learn? Whereas being able to convince myself that all of these incredible people with their incredible stories and their incredible life experiences have the wealth of the whole world to teach me. And so when someone comes at me with something that I might not know or agree with or feel, I'm a lot more curious rather than defensive. And that leads me to hopefully being able to approach life with a bit more of an open heart, and also diffuse a lot of things that might feel like they're attacks. That's why it's such a core tenet to all of the work that I do, really, in the life that I live. It really helps me lead a life that I choose to and feel like I'm in the driving seat rather than life is happening at me.
Yeah. So what might you have to say to somebody who's really struggling right now? Do you have any words of wisdom to offer and share?
I think some of the things that have helped me most on my journey, especially with self-esteem and body image, is to really think about when you are feeling at your most down and your most unkind to yourself. If you're able to take a step back and ask yourself, who is profiting from me feeling like this? Because somebody is. And when I'm able to take that step back and look at the fact that someone is benefiting financially from my pain, or from the way that women very predominantly are encouraged to trash themselves on a regular basis and to slander themselves physically and emotionally, then I'm able to summon within me the courage and rage to challenge it. Whereas when I think that it is my fault and my problem, I'm quite often filled with shame and I don't want to take any action. And so I wish almost this was a photograph rather than a podcast, but I feel like if I was to mime at you, it's the difference between like being closed like an armadillo or being like open like the sound of music. When I'm able to summon that political rage of going, someone is benefiting from me feeling like this, then I'm able to want to take the impetus to have the courage to challenge the fact that things might not be as awful as we are told to believe about our bodies. And there is something really important about acknowledging that it is a brave step to challenge your self-esteem, your body confidence, and your body image, and to be able to stand within your own light and your own glory. And the other thing that I think it's really important to share is when you're not able to dig into that and when you're not able to lift yourself for your own healing and for your own courage and for your own benefit and future, if there is any way that you can take a step back and really seize the fact that there is a very high likelihood that you having the courage and the bravery to challenge some of the self-esteem and body confidence issues that you have will create a space and will wear a path down for someone who comes after you who looks a little bit like you to be able to feel more welcome in the world. And there is going to be experiences that you have and language that you use with the very clear way that you phrase things, and you've learnt things and you're able to put things forward that someone really needs. And so when you're not able to look after yourself for the sake of yourself, sometimes it might be easier to think about the people who come after us and why it is worth doing for all of our younger sisters who come after us, and the potential and the hope that what if it stopped here? What if we were the last generation of people to really undermine our own potential and our own magic and our own futures by wasting so much time being cruel to our bodies? What if we were the ones who built the dam to stop that? And of course that's going to be heavy, but also of course that's going to be worth it. Sometimes I find that a driving force when I'm not able to summon the impetus for myself alone. That sense of community and community encouraging all the people who are not even born yet, as well as fighting for the sake of all of the ancestors that have got me so far. That I find an incredible motivating driver.
Absolutely. Behind everything that you do, there is this challenging of the construct of capitalism, racism, this patriarchal society, and this vision of what is beautiful, how women are supposed to be, all the influences of that on society. And like you said, maybe we can be the generation now that starts to put some closure on all of that.
It would be a really amazing thing. That would a massive point of the driving force for me, is to make sure that the work that I do and to carry on educating myself to be as intersectional as possible and make sure that no one gets left behind, because I'm not interested in some of us making it over the line. None of us would get anywhere until the person who is struggling the most is coming with us. Yeah,
for sure. So how people work with you, Anna?
I am most prolific on Twitter. Both Twitter and Instagram, I am Heard in London. That's heard like hearing, not heard like immunity. And my website is also Heard in London, so heardinlondon.com. And for people who want to challenge their view that they hold of their body or want to see themselves in a fresh light, I would love to work with as many diverse people as possible to try and help them see their own magic. That's what I'm here for. Try and help support you believe that your body is worthy too.
Thank you so much, Anna. It really has been a joy to have you as our guest this month. And the recipe tip I wanted to share with all of you this month is inspired by Anna's stories of Nepal and India, bringing in those pungent spices into creating another tasty and nutritious snack idea. So roasted spiced chickpeas. You can easily make these either using cooked chickpeas that you can buy now in glass jars instead of in tins, or more optimally, you can cook your own from dry chickpeas and then continue this recipe from there. And why not be even more efficient with this? You could batch cook a lot of chickpeas from scratch and then freeze them in bags, ready for you to take out and batch make these at any time. So once you have your cooked chickpeas, pat them dry with a clean tea towel or with kitchen paper, and make sure to remove as much moisture as you possibly can. And if you rub them a little bit in the cloth or your paper, the skins will also release and you can just pick those out. And I find that without skins, the chickpeas turn crispier and seem easier to digest. So then add them to a bowl with a little bit of mild olive or coconut oil, a little sea salt and some black pepper. Then transfer them onto a flat baking sheet lined with parchment paper. Then place in your preheated oven. Now, with regards to the temperature, I like to cook these long and slow. So a low temperature of around 120 degrees. I find this brings out more intensity of flavour and you're less likely to burn the chickpeas. On a lower temperature, they dry out more and become more crunchy. And this can take approximately 1 hour or more, 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, depending on your oven and depending on how much moisture there is in your chickpeas. Take them from the oven. So test your chickpeas after about an hour and see if they're starting to go dry and crunchy, but they're not yet golden brown. Maybe they're turning a little bit brown. At this point, take them from the oven and add the spices. Coat them well with cumin powder, coriander powder, and garam masala. Even better if you dry toast whole spices and then grind them yourself. Sometimes I also add a little onion or garlic powder too, and chili powder. So toss them together, coat the chickpeas completely, and then put them back into the oven. Maybe take a taste test to be sure that you're happy with it. I also love to make variations of this, substituting the garam masala for smoked paprika. Or you could use a spice blend of Ras El Hanout and for a more Moroccan version. Once the spices are on the chickpeas, put them back into the oven for about 10 to 15 minutes. And now throughout this kind of taste test your chickpeas, you want to just get the right taste balance for you and the crispiness that you want. Some people like them really crunchy. Some people like them more crunchy on the outside and a bit softer in the middle. So once the chickpeas are cooked to your liking, leave them to cool, then add them into glass jars, and they'll stay good there for approximately 5 days, if they last that long, of course. It's also really nice to make versions of this with nuts such as almonds or cashews, and seeds such as sunflower or pumpkin seeds. So I haven't given you any quantities here with this recipe. You can really tailor this to your liking and to the flavors that you really love and enjoy. So you know how spicy you might want them, or more on the warming side of the spices, or more smoky if you choose to use smoked paprika. So play with that to get just the right amount for you. The same with the seasoning of the salt. And so, Kirsten, what nutrition tip do you have for us this month?
My nutrition tip for this session is more around how you eat, which is just as important as what you eat. I have a practice I share with most people who come to see me that I call 3 mindful mouthfuls. It borrows from mindfulness practices in general and has the same advantage of helping to calm the nervous system. And this has many well-researched benefits for mental and physical well-being, including digestive activity. Today, however, I'm interested in how valuable it can be for our relationship with food and with our bodies. 3 mindful mouthfuls is exactly that. So you're eating the first 3 mouthfuls of any meal or snack as mindfully as you can, using your feeling senses. So I usually start by looking at the food, consciously engaging with it, then perhaps smelling it, tasting it, feeling the sensations as I'm chewing, swallowing, all as calmly as I can, with a light sense of curiosity. Sometimes the food I'm eating fills me with joy. Sometimes I don't like the taste or texture, but I might explore that playfully anyway. Sometimes I feel fairly neutral about it, so I just focus on the experience. But what I'm not doing is thinking, oh, this food is really bad for me, or even this food is really good for me, or judging the food in any way, whatever it is. And if I find those thoughts popping up, I thank them for their point of view, let them go, and get back to exploring the physical sensations of the food. If you're eating out of anger or sadness, perhaps comfort eating or binge eating, then this practice really helps to take the emotional charge out. You can still eat the food, but in a way that is fully or more fully accepting of yourself, more fully savouring whatever comfort that food brings, rather than eating in a numb or an adrenalized state that then leads often to self-recrimination. Eating in this way also plants your awareness into your physical body. So it's really very centering and reconnecting. When we experience discomfort in our bodies or disappointment, shame, mistrust, then we shy away from feeling centered in them. So this practice, done gently and with playfulness, can help us to feel more comfortable and even loving towards our physical selves. Just that sense of hanging out with our physical bodies can really shift our relationship with them. Now, mindfulness is a practice. That means we all have to practice it. You're not necessarily going to be good at this straight away or all the time. We're easily distracted, and a big distraction can be self-judgment as well as judgment of the food. So whenever you hear yourself start to judge how your body feels in any way, too stiff, too fat, too skinny, too sluggish, too weak, whatever it is, just smile at yourself compassionately and let that voice float away, and then get back to just feeling. You can, of course, eat a whole meal mindfully from time to time if you choose to, but that's not always appropriate, especially if you're with other people. And it can also be quite tough. In fact, for some people, 3 mindful mouthfuls is a challenge. So if you can only manage 1 to begin with, that's absolutely fine. Just keep practicing playfully with no expectations. As Hayley and I were talking about earlier, some people with PTSD and deep trauma find it difficult to settle into their bodies. And actually, this approach may not be helpful. You may find some kind of movement more useful, or you may need to find a skilled trauma therapist to work with you. But if this is the right approach for you, and for many of you it absolutely will be, then you may find over time that your relationship to food and your body really changes. It may even start to subtly shift your food choices, because now you're eating in a way that's less based on judgments you have around food and your body, and more based on how food actually makes you feel. So thanks for listening to episode 3 of the North and Chick podcast with very special guest Anna Strickland. We have one small favour to ask of you. Please share this podcast with at least one other person today. Much love to you all.
So if you enjoyed that, please subscribe to our North and Chick podcast, and also follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter as North and Chick, all lowercase, no spaces.